The rain fell hard that night. Cold drops hammered against the palace windows like tiny fists demanding to be heard. Inside the grand hallway, Alexander stood at attention. His uniform was pressed. His shoulders were square, but his heart was breaking. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not anymore. The orders had come 3 hours ago. Transfer to the northern estates. Immediate. No exceptions. Someone had found out. Alexander's jaw tightened. 23 years old, 5 years in the royal guard, and he'd never broken protocol. Not once. Until her. The clock on the marble wall ticked toward midnight. Each second felt like a hammer blow. In 12 hours, he would leave this palace forever, and he would never see Catherine again. Down the hallway, a door opened. Soft footsteps. Alexander's pulse quickened. He knew that walk. Light, graceful, but with purpose. She appeared around the corner in a simple blue dress, her dark hair falling loose around her shoulders. No crown, no jewels. Just Catherine. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither moved. "You weren't supposed to come," Alexander whispered, his voice barely audible. "I know." Catherine stepped closer, glancing behind her. The hallway was empty, but palaces had eyes everywhere. "They told me you're leaving at dawn because of me." It wasn't a question. Alexander wanted to lie, to tell her it was routine, just another assignment. But they'd promised each other something months ago. No lies. Not between them. "Yes," he said quietly. "Because of us." Before you continue this story, if you're enjoying it, please hit that subscribe button. You won't regret it. These stories take time to craft, and your support means everything. Catherine's hand trembled as she reached into her pocket. She pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges as if she'd been holding it for hours. "My father wants me to marry Lord Edmund. The announcement is next week." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. Lord Edmund. 47 years old, twice widowed, with estates across 3 counties. A strategic match. A political alliance. Everything a royal marriage was supposed to be. Everything their love wasn't. "When did you find out?" Alexander asked. "This morning. Before I heard about your transfer," Catherine's voice cracked. "Alexander, they're separating us. Deliberately. Of course they were." The palace staff talked. Whispers traveled faster than horses here. A royal daughter and a palace guard. The scandal alone could damage the family's reputation. But it was more than that. Catherine was the king's youngest daughter, his favorite, and the only one not yet married off. She was valuable. And Alexander? He was nobody. The son of a blacksmith from a village no one had heard of. He'd earned his position through skill and loyalty. But that meant nothing when it came to matters of the heart. "You should go back," Alexander said, though every part of him wanted her to stay. "If someone sees us, let them see." Gotham's eyes flashed with defiance. That fire was what had drawn him to her in the first place. She wasn't like the other royals. She didn't smile politely while her eyes stayed cold. When Catherine felt something, she felt it completely.
"Catherine, do you love me?"
she asked suddenly. The question hung in the air between them. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance. Alexander had been trained to protect the royal family with his life. He'd sworn oaths, made promises to his country, his king, but none of those oaths had prepared him for this moment. "More than anything," he answered. Catherine stepped forward until they were inches apart. "Then don't leave." "I have no choice." "Always have a choice." Her hand found his. Her skin was soft, warm against his calloused palm. "Run away with me." Alexander's breath caught. "What? Tonight?" "Right now. We can take horses, be gone before sunrise. By the time they realize we'll be far enough, they'll hunt us down." Alexander's voice was gentle but firm. "Your father is the king. There's nowhere in this kingdom we could hide. Then we leave the kingdom, the boldness of it, the impossibility." Alexander wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. This was madness. Beautiful, desperate madness. "You're a princess," he said. "You've lived in palaces your whole life. You don't know what it's like out there. The cold, the hunger, the danger. I know what it's like to live without you, Catherine interrupted. And that's worse than anything. Her words broke something inside him. All his training, all his discipline, all the walls he'd built to keep this exact moment from happening, they crumbled. If we do this, Alexander said slowly, there's no coming back. You'll lose everything. Your title, your family, your home, I'll have you. The simplicity of it. The truth. Alexander looked into her eyes and saw his entire future reflected there. A future that didn't include palaces or protocols. Just them, but someone was coming. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the hallway. Heavy boots. Multiple guards, Catherine heard them too. Her grip on his hand tightened. The East Garden, she whispered urgently. 1 hour. There's a loose stone in the wall near the rose bushes. If you come, I'll know your answer. Then she was gone, disappearing around the corner just as 3 guards rounded the opposite end of the hallway. Alexander stood alone in the empty corridor, his heart pounding. 1 hour to decide the rest of his life. Alexander returned to his quarters with his mind spinning. The small room felt smaller than ever. A narrow bed. A trunk for his belongings. A single window overlooking the courtyard. This had been his home for 5 years. By morning, it would belong to someone else. He sat on the edge of the bed and dropped his head into his hands. 1 hour, Catherine had given him 1 hour to choose between duty and love. Between everything he'd built and everything he wanted. His father's voice echoed in his memory. A man's word is his honor, Alexander. Once you give your oath, you keep it, no matter what. Alexander had given his oath to the crown. To protect and serve, to put the royal family above all else, including himself. Breaking that oath, running away with the king's daughter, it was treason. They could be executed for it. Hunted down and brought. Back in chains. But staying meant losing her forever. He thought about the first time he'd really seen Catherine. Not as a princess, but as a person. It was 8 months ago during a state dinner. She'd been seated at the high table, smiling politely at some foreign dignitary who droned on about trade routes. But her eyes had been distant, sad. When the man finally looked away, her smile had dropped like a mask being removed. Alexander had been standing guard near the doorway. Their eyes met for just a second. In that moment, he'd seen something he recognized. Loneliness. The kind that comes from being surrounded by people, but truly known by no one. After dinner, she'd walked past him toward the library. As she passed, she'd whispered, "Do you ever feel like you're playing a part that isn't really you?" He should have stayed silent, should have kept his eyes forward. But he'd answered, "Every day, Your Highness." She'd stopped, turned, looked at him like he'd said something revolutionary. "You're honest. That's rare here." That was how it started. Small conversations in quiet hallways. Her asking about his life before the palace, him listening to her talk about feeling trapped in silk and ceremony. Slowly, carefully, something grew between them. Something neither of them had planned. Something dangerous. Alexander stood and walked to the window. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. In the distance, he could see the East Garden, dark, silent, waiting. His hands curled into fists. Every rational part of his mind screamed at him to stay, to accept the transfer, to let Catherine marry Lord Edmund and live the life she was born to live. She would be safe, provided for, protected. But would she be happy? He thought about the paper she'd shown him. The announcement of her engagement, her father's decision, not hers. In the palace, Catherine had everything: wealth, status, luxury. Everything except choice. Alexander had grown up with nothing. His family's forge had barely produced enough to survive. But his father had been happy. His mother had been happy. Because they'd chosen each other. No one had arranged it. No political alliance. Just love. The clock tower chimed. 30 minutes had passed. Alexander opened his trunk. Inside were his few possessions. Letters from his mother. A knife his father had forged. The first coin he'd ever earned. Simple things. a simple life. He pulled out a small leather pouch from the bottom. Inside was every coin he'd saved over 5 years. Not much. Enough to survive for a few months if they were careful. If they ran far enough. If they were lucky. His hands shook as he held the pouch. This was insane, reckless. Everything his training had taught him to avoid. But then he remembered Catherine's face tonight, the desperation in her eyes. I know what it's like to live without you, and that's worse than anything. Alexander made his decision. He changed quickly, trading his guard uniform for plain traveling clothes, dark colors. Nothing that would draw attention. He strapped his knife to his belt and tucked the coin pouch inside his shirt. Then he grabbed his cloak and moved toward the door. The hallway outside was quiet. Most of the palace guard would be at their posts or sleeping. Alexander knew the rotations, knew the blind spots. He'd helped design the security himself. He moved through the shadows, keeping to the servants' corridors. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every creak of the floorboards sounded like thunder. But no one stopped him. No alarm was raised. The east garden was accessed through the kitchen courtyard. Alexander slipped through the door and into the cool night air. The smell of rain and roses filled his lungs. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl hooted. He found the rose bushes, found the loose stone in the wall. His fingers traced the edge. One push, and it would open to a passage that led beyond the palace grounds. Catherine had discovered it as a child. She'd told him about it once, laughing about how she'd used it to sneak out and explore the village. That passage was their escape route. If she came, if she'd meant what she said, Alexander waited in the shadows, watching the garden entrance. Minutes crawled by. The rain stopped completely. Stars appeared between the clouds. Then he saw her. Catherine emerged from the darkness wearing a hooded cloak, carrying a small bag. She moved quickly, glancing behind her. When she reached the rose bushes, she looked around, searching. I'm here, Alexander whispered. She spun toward his voice, pulling back her hood. Relief flooded her face. You came. I came. They stood there for a moment, the weight of what they were about to do settling between them. This was it. The point of no return? Are you sure? Alexander asked. Last chance to change her mind. Last chance to save her from this mistake? Catherine reached out and took his hand. Her grip was strong, steady. I've never been more sure of anything. Alexander nodded. He pushed the loose stone. It swung inward silently, revealing a dark tunnel. Cool air drifted out from the passage. Once we go through, he said, we can't come back, I know. They'll call you a traitor. They'll hunt us, I know. Catherine, she kissed him. Soft and fierce at the same time. When she pulled back, her eyes were bright with tears and determination. Stop trying to protect me from my own choices. I choose you. I choose us. Now let's go before I lose my nerve. Alexander squeezed her hand. Then, together, they stepped into the darkness of the tunnel. Behind them, the loose stone swung shut with a soft click. The palace, with all its guards and protocols and expectations, disappeared. They were free, and they were hunted, and their journey had only just begun. The tunnel was narrow and cold. Alexander led the way, one hand on the damp stone wall, the other holding Catherine's hand tightly. Their footsteps echoed softly in the darkness. Water dripped somewhere ahead. How far does this go? Catherine whispered. About half a mile. It opens near the forest edge. The tunnel had been built generations ago as an escape route for the royal family during sieges. Most people had forgotten it existed. But Catherine had found it as a curious child, and she'd kept the secret. Until tonight, they walked in silence, each step taking them farther from the life they'd known. Alexander's mind raced with plans. They needed horses, supplies, distance. By dawn, the palace would discover them missing. By noon, search parties would be mobilized. They had maybe 12 hours before the entire kingdom was looking for them. The tunnel began to slope upward. Fresh air replaced the musty smell of stone. Alexander could see a faint light ahead, moonlight filtering through the exit. They emerged into a small clearing surrounded by thick trees. The palace walls were barely visible through the branches, lit by torches along the ramparts. They were outside. Actually outside. Catherine took a deep breath, tilting her face toward the sky. For a moment, she looked so young, so free. Then reality crashed back. She pulled her hood up quickly. "Where do we go?" "West," Alexander said. "Away from the main roads. There's a village about 10 miles from here. Small, quiet. We can get horses and supplies there, without drawing attention." 10 miles? He heard the uncertainty in her voice. Catherine had ridden horses for leisure, but never traveled on foot. Never had to. Alexander felt a pang of doubt. What was he doing? Taking a princess into the wilderness with nothing but hope and a bag of coins. But when he looked at her, Catherine's jaw was set with determination. "Then we'd better start walking." They moved quickly through the forest, staying off the paths. Branches caught at their cloaks. Roots tried to trip them, but they kept moving. Behind them, the palace grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely behind the trees. After 2 hours of walking, Catherine stumbled. Alexander caught her before she fell. "Are you all right?" "Yes, just tired." But her breathing was labored. Her face was pale in the moonlight. "We'll rest," Alexander decided. He led her to a fallen log and helped her sit. He knelt in front of her, studying her face. "Tell me the truth. Can you do this?" Catherine met his eyes. "Can you?" "I've traveled on foot before. Slept under stars. Hunted for food. This isn't new to me." "Then teach me," she said simply. "I'm not going back, Alexander. So teach me how to survive out here." Her courage humbled him. She was giving up everything: comfort, safety, family, and she wasn't complaining. She was adapting. "All right," he said. "First lesson: conserve your energy. We walk when we can, rest when we must. No heroics." "Second lesson: trust me." She smiled. Actually smiled. "That one's easy." He rested for 20 minutes, then continued. The forest began to thin as they approached the village. Alexander could see scattered lights in the distance. Farmhouses. Maybe an inn, but as they got closer, something felt wrong. Too many lights. Too much activity for the middle of the night. Alexander pulled Catherine behind a tree. "Wait here." "What's wrong?" "I don't know. But something's not right." He crept forward, staying in the shadows. As he got closer to the village edge, he heard voices. Loud, angry. Then he saw them. Royal guards. At least a dozen, going door to door with torches. Alexander's blood turned to ice. How? How had they known to come here? Then he understood. The palace hadn't waited until dawn to discover them missing. Someone had checked. Maybe Catherine's maid. Maybe a guard doing rounds. And once they realized both Catherine and Alexander were gone at the same time, the conclusion was obvious. The king's men weren't just searching. They were hunting. Alexander backed away carefully and returned to Catherine. Her face fell when she saw his expression. "They're here already?" "A full patrol. Searching the village, then we can't get horses." Alexander's mind raced. Without horses, they couldn't outrun pursuit. But if they stayed near the village, they'd be caught by morning. "We have to go deeper into the forest. Find another way." Catherine nodded, but Alexander saw the fear in her eyes. The forest stretched for miles in every direction. No roads, no shelter, and they had no supplies. Just the clothes on their backs and his small bag of coins. They turned back into the trees. This time, Alexander led them away from any settlements. Deeper into the wilderness, away from roads, villages, anything the guards might search. The night grew colder. Catherine's steps became slower, but she didn't ask to stop. Didn't complain. She just kept walking, her hand in his, trusting him to lead them somewhere safe. Near dawn, they found a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. It was barely more than an indent in the rocks, but it was dry and concealed. Alexander checked for animals first, then helped Catherine inside. She collapsed against the stone wall, exhausted. Her fine dress was torn and muddy. Her hands were scratched from branches, but she was smiling. "We made it." "For now," Alexander said. He removed his cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Rest. I'll keep watch. You need to rest too." Later, he sat at the cave entrance, watching the forest. Listening for any sound of pursuit, Catherine was asleep within minutes, her head resting against the stone. Alexander watched her, this brave, stubborn, impossible woman who'd given up a kingdom for him. What had he promised her? What kind of life could he give her? But then he remembered her words. "I'll have you." Maybe that would be enough. It had to be. As the sun began to rise, Alexander heard it. Distant but distinct. Dogs. Tracking dogs. The king had brought hunters. Alexander's jaw clenched. They couldn't stay here. The cave would hide them for a few hours, maybe, but the dogs would find their scent eventually. He looked at Catherine, sleeping peacefully for the first time in probably days. He didn't want to wake her. Didn't want to see the fear return to her eyes. But they had no choice. The hunt was closing in, and their escape was about to become much, much harder. Alexander woke Catherine gently. Her eyes fluttered open, confused for a moment. Then memory returned. She sat up quickly. "How long was I asleep?" "An hour. Maybe 2. Kept his voice calm, but his muscles were tense. "We need to move. They have dogs." Understanding flashed across her face. She didn't waste time with questions. Just stood, wrapped his cloak tighter, waited for him to lead. They left the cave and headed toward the sound of running water. The waterfall. Alexander had a plan. Desperate, but possible. Water would mask their scent. If they could wade through the stream long enough, the dogs might lose the trail. The water was freezing. Catherine gasped as they stepped in, but she didn't hesitate. They moved upstream, careful not to slip on the rocks. The current pulled at their legs. The cold bit through their clothes. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, Alexander led them out of the water on the far bank. They were both shaking. Catherine's lips had turned blue. "We need to warm you up," Alexander said. He pulled her into a thick cluster of trees and helped her sit. Then he gathered dry leaves and small branches, building a tiny fire using flint from his pocket. The flames were small, barely enough for warmth, but better than nothing. Catherine held her hands toward the heat. "You knew this would happen. The dogs. The hunt. You tried to warn me. I did. Do you regret it? Coming with me?" Alexander looked at her, shivering, exhausted, her fancy dress ruined, her royal life destroyed, and still somehow beautiful. Not for a second. Her eyes met his. Warmth spread between them that had nothing to do with the fire, but they couldn't stay long. The fire was a risk smoke could give away their position. After Catherine stopped shaking, Alexander stamped it out. "Can you keep going?" "Yes," her voice was stronger now. "Where are we headed?" "There's a port city. 3 days' walk, if we push hard. From there, we can get on a ship. Leave the kingdom entirely and go where?" "Anywhere." Xander helped her to her feet. "Somewhere they won't follow. Somewhere we can start over." They walked through the day, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Alexander found berries he knew were safe to eat. Not much, but enough to keep their strength up. Catherine never complained, never asked to stop. She just kept moving, one foot in front of the other. By late afternoon, they reached a small farming community. Just a few cottages scattered across a valley. Alexander studied it from the tree line. No guards, no horses. Just simple people living simple lives. "Wait here," he told Catherine. "I'm going to trade for supplies. Is it safe?" "Safer than starving." He approached the nearest cottage with his hands visible, non-threatening. An old woman answered his knock. She looked him up and down suspiciously. "What do you want?" "Food and water. I can pay." Alexander pulled out a silver coin. More than anything in this village was worth. The woman's eyes widened. She snatched the coin and disappeared inside. Minutes later, she returned with a cloth bundle. Bread, cheese, dried meat, and a water skin. "There's talk of soldiers searching for runaways," she said quietly. "A lord's daughter who fled with a servant." Alexander's stomach dropped. The story was spreading. They were making Catherine sound like a victim. Him? A kidnapper. Clever. It would turn the whole kingdom against them. "I don't know anything about that," Alexander said carefully. The old woman studied him. Then she pressed another bundle into his hands. Warmer clothes. Worn, but clean. "The soldiers went north this morning. You should go south." Alexander met her eyes. She knew, and she was helping them anyway. "Thank you. Everyone deserves a chance at happiness," she said. "Even fools." She shut the door. Alexander returned to Catherine with the supplies. They changed into the warmer clothes behind separate trees. The garments were plain peasant clothing that would help them blend in. Catherine stared at her reflection in a puddle of water. Without her fine dress, without the markers of royalty, she looked like anyone, everyone. "I look like a different person," she said quietly. "You look free," Alexander replied. They ate as they walked, putting distance between themselves and the village. The bread was stale but filling. The meat was tough, but gave them energy. It was the best meal Alexander had tasted in days. That night, they didn't risk a fire. They huddled together under Alexander's cloak in a hollow between two large rocks. The warmth of their bodies pressed together kept the worst of the cold away. "Tell me about the port city," Catherine said softly. "It's called Merrick's Landing. Ships come and go every day. Traders, merchants, adventurers. No one asks questions. Have you been there before?" "Once, when I first joined the Guard. We escorted a diplomatic envoy." Alexander remembered the noise, the chaos, the freedom of a place where no one knew his name. "It's not beautiful like the palace. It smells like fish and salt water. But it's honest. It sounds perfect." They fell silent. Around them, the forest was alive with night sounds. Owls hooting, small creatures rustling through leaves, the wind in the trees. Alexander had never felt more awake, more present. Every sense was heightened. This was survival. Real, raw. Catherine shifted against him. "Alexander?" "Yes. Whatever happens, even if they catch a sigh, want you to know, I don't regret this." His arm tightened around her. "We're not getting caught. But if we do, we won't. Promise me something." Her voice was urgent now. "Promise me that if they catch us, you'll tell them I forced you, that I threatened you. Make them believe you're innocent, Catherine. Promise me. You can survive this. They might forgive you eventually, but I need to know you'll be all right." Alexander pulled back so he could see her face in the moonlight. "I'm not letting you take the blame alone. We're in this together. All of it. Until the end. That's what I'm afraid of." "Shh," she whispered. He kissed her then. Soft, desperate. A promise without words. When they finally slept, it was tangled together, holding each other like lifelines. As if letting go meant losing everything neither of them saw. Figure watching from the trees. Silent, still. The palace hadn't just sent soldiers and dogs. They'd sent someone who knew Alexander. Someone who'd trained with him. Someone who knew how he thought, how he moved, and that someone had just found them. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. Morning came too soon. Alexander woke to the sound of birdsong and the feeling that something was wrong. His instincts, honed through 5 years of guard duty, were screaming danger. He sat up slowly, careful not to wake Catherine. The forest looked peaceful. Too peaceful. No small animals moving. No rustling in the underbrush. As if everything was holding its breath. Then he saw it. A broken branch. Fresh. About 30 feet away. Someone had been here recently. Someone who didn't know how to move through the forest without leaving signs. Alexander's hand went to his knife. He scanned the trees, searching for movement, for anything out of place. Nothing, but the feeling wouldn't go away. "Catherine," he whispered. "Wake up." She stirred, opening her eyes. Instantly alert. She'd learned fast over the past few days. "What is it?" "Someone was here. Last night, maybe. Or early this morning." Catherine sat up, fear flickering across her face. The soldiers. I don't know. But we need to move. Now. They gathered their few belongings and started walking. Alexander chose a different direction, southeast instead of south. If someone was tracking them, he needed to break the pattern. Keep them guessing. They'd been walking for maybe an hour when Alexander heard it. A whistle. Low, specific. The signal guards used to communicate during patrols. He froze. Catherine saw his reaction and stopped beside him. What? Stay behind me. Alexander drew his knife. From the trees ahead, a figure emerged. Tall, familiar, dressed in the dark clothing of the royal guard. Alexander's heart sank. Marcus, his former patrol partner. His friend, Marcus, stopped about 20 feet away, his hand resting on his sword, but not drawing it. He looked tired, conflicted. Alexander, Marcus. Alexander kept his voice steady, kept his body between Marcus and Catherine. I was wondering when they'd send you. They sent everyone. Marcus's eyes flicked to Catherine, then back to Alexander. The king is offering a reward. 10,000 gold pieces for her safe return. 1,000 for yours. Dead or alive? Alexander asked bitterly. Alive. Both of you. Marcus took a step closer. Alexander, what are you doing? This is madness. She's a princess. You're a guard. This can only end one way. Then you know which way it ends. I know which way it should end. Marcus's voice hardened. You come back with me now. You return her safely. The king might show mercy. Call it temporary madness. Reduce the punishment. What about her punishment? Alexander asked. What happens to Catherine? Marcus hesitated. She'll marry Lord Edmund. As planned? No. Catherine stepped out from behind Alexander. Her voice was clear, strong. I won't go back to that life. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not a princess, but a person. Your Highness, please. Your father is worried. Your family, my family, arranged my life like furniture, Catherine interrupted. Where I sit, who I marry. What I say? I'm not a person to them. I'm a piece on a chessboard. That's your duty. That was my prison. Catherine moved to stand beside Alexander. I know you're his friend. I know this is hard, but we're not going back. Marcus's jaw tightened. For a long moment, no one moved. Alexander could see the war happening behind Marcus's eyes. Duty versus friendship. Orders versus conscience. Finally, Marcus spoke. There are 12 guards searching this forest. Dogs. Hunters. I found you first by luck. They'll find you by noon. Then we'd better keep moving, Alexander said. They'll catch you eventually. You know that? Maybe. But we'll be free until they do. Marcus shook his head slowly. Then, unbelievably, he stepped aside. The dogs are north of here. The main search party is east. Your best chance is southwest, toward the mountains. Alexander stared at him. You're letting us go? I'm telling you which direction to avoid. What you do with that information is your choice. Marcus met Alexander's eyes. You saved my life once, remember? During the bandit attack 3 years ago, Alexander remembered. Marcus had been wounded, surrounded. Alexander had dragged him to safety while arrows fell around them. I'm returning the favor, Marcus continued. But this is it. If I see you again, I'll have to bring you in. Both of you. Understand? Understood. Xander's throat was tight. Thank you, Marcus nodded. Then he looked at Catherine. I hope you find what you're looking for, Your Highness. But I'm sorry you had to lose everything to get it. I didn't lose everything, Catherine said softly. I gained what matters. Something flickered in Marcus's expression. Sadness, maybe. Or understanding. Then he turned and walked back into the forest. Alexander waited until he was gone, then grabbed Catherine's hand. Southwest? Quickly. They moved fast, abandoning caution for speed. If Marcus could find them, others could too. They needed distance. They needed the mountains. The terrain grew rougher. Hills became slopes. Slopes became climbs. By midday, they were ascending a steep mountain path. Catherine's breathing was labored. Her face was flushed with effort. "Almost there," Alexander encouraged. "Once we're over this ridge, we'll be out of the forest." "Harder to track. How much farther to the port?" 2 days. "Maybe less if we push." They reached the top of the ridge as the sun began to set. Below them, the land spread out in a patchwork of fields and forests. In the far distance, Alexander could see it. A thin blue line. The ocean, Catherine saw it too? Her face lit up. "We're going to make it." Don't celebrate yet, but he felt it too. Hope. Real, tangible hope. They descended the far side of the mountain as darkness fell. At the bottom, they found a shepherd's hut. Abandoned. The door hung crooked on its hinges, but it had a roof and 4 walls. "We'll stay here tonight," Alexander decided. "Rest properly. Then make the final push tomorrow." Inside, the hut was small but dry. Alexander checked for animals, then helped Catherine sit on the old wooden bench. She was shaking with exhaustion. "You're incredible today," he said, kneeling in front of her. "Most people couldn't have done what you did." "Most people didn't fall in love with a palace guard," he smiled. Touched her face. Their loss. They shared the last of their food. Stale bread and hard cheese. It tasted like the finest meal because they were eating it together. Free. Alive. That night, they slept in each other's arms on the rough wooden floor. It was uncomfortable, cold, nothing like the soft beds of the palace. Catherine had never been happier. Outside, the wind howled through the mountains. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges, but tonight they were safe. They were together, and they were almost free. They woke to thunder. Rain hammered against the roof of the shepherd's hut. Alexander went to the door and looked out. The storm was fierce. Visibility was almost zero. "Can't travel in this," he said. Catherine came to stand beside him. "How long will it last?" "Hours. Maybe all day." Alexander frowned. The delay was dangerous. Every hour they stayed in one place was another chance for the search parties to close in. But traveling through a mountain storm was suicide. "Then we wait," Catherine said practically. They spent the morning huddled in the hut, listening to the rain. They talked about everything and nothing. Catherine told stories about growing up in the palace, the tutors who'd taught her useless skills like flower arrangement and polite conversation, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who saw her title, not her. Alexander told her about his childhood in the forge, the heat of the fire, the smell of hot metal, his father's rough hands teaching him to shape iron, the simplicity of that life, the honesty. "Do you miss it?" Catherine asked. "Sometimes. But I wouldn't go back." Alexander looked at her. "Everything I want is right here." The rain finally stopped near noon. They stepped outside into a world washed clean. The air smelled fresh. The sky was clearing. They started walking again, their clothes still damp, but their spirits lifted. The ocean was close now. Alexander could smell the salt in the air. By evening, they saw it. Merrick's Landing. The port city sprawled along the coast, all wooden buildings and crowded docks. Ships bobbed in the harbor. Hundreds of people moved through the streets. "We made it," Catherine breathed. "Not yet." Alexander pulled her back into the tree line. "Once we're in the city, we need to blend in. Act like everyone else. Don't draw attention. What if someone recognizes me? You're dressed like a peasant. Your hair is dirty. Your face is sunburned." Alexander smiled gently. "You don't look like a princess anymore. You look like someone who's worked hard her whole life." They entered the city as darkness fell. No one gave them a second glance. They were just 2 more travelers in a sea of faces. Alexander led Catherine through the winding streets toward the harbor. The docks were busy even at night. Sailors loading cargo. Merchants haggling over prices. The smell of fish and tar filled the air. Alexander approached a ship captain, a weathered man with gray in his beard. Looking for passage? To people. Wherever you're headed? The captain looked them over. Can you pay? Alexander pulled out his coin pouch. It was lighter than it had been, but still enough. How much? Depends where you're going. We leave for the Southern Isles at dawn. 3 weeks' journey, 20 silver each. The Southern Isles, far enough that the king's reach wouldn't extend. A place where they could disappear. Start over. We'll take it, Alexander said. The captain nodded. Be here before sunrise. We don't wait for stragglers. They found a cheap inn near the docks. The room was tiny. The bed was lumpy, but it was theirs. Alexander locked the door and finally let himself relax. Catherine collapsed on the bed with a laugh. We did it. We actually did it. Alexander sat beside her. Tomorrow morning, we get on that ship. Once we're at sea, we're beyond the kingdom's borders. Beyond their reach, then we're free. Then we're free. Catherine sat up and took his hands. Her eyes were serious. What will we do? In the Southern Isles, we have no home, no family, no plan. We'll build a home, make a family, create a plan. Skates her hands. I can work. My father taught me smithing. I can find employment. I can learn, Catherine interrupted. Whatever needs doing. I'm not afraid of work. I know you're not. Alexander had seen her prove that over the past days. She was stronger than anyone had given her credit for. Braver than she'd believed. They fell silent, the weight of what they'd accomplished settling over them. They'd escaped. Together, against impossible odds. Alexander, Catherine said softly, yes. When we get to the Isles, when we're safe, will you marry me? His breath caught. Catherine, not as a princess, not as some political arrangement, just as me. Catherine, will you marry me? Alexander looked at this extraordinary woman, brave enough to run, strong enough to survive, bold enough to propose. His heart felt too big for his chest. Yes, he said. Yes, I'll marry you. She kissed him, fierce, joyful, a promise of everything to come. That night they slept peacefully. No running, no fear. Just the sound of waves against the docks and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring freedom. But Alexander woke before dawn to the sound of boots on stairs, heavy, multiple people. His eyes snapped open. His hand went to his knife. But before he could move, the door burst open. Royal guards flooded in. 6 of them, swords drawn, and behind them, stepping through the doorway with cold eyes, was the king. Catherine gasped, scrambling to sit up. Father, silence. The king's voice was ice. He looked at her with an expression Alexander couldn't read. Anger. Disappointment? Fear? One of the guards grabbed Alexander, yanking him away from Catherine. Another guard pulled her to her feet. She struggled, but they held her firmly. Let him go, Catherine demanded. This was my choice, my decision. He kidnapped you, the king interrupted. That's what we'll say. That's what everyone will believe. No. Catherine fought against the guard's grip. I won't let you do this. I won't. You'll do what I tell you. The king's voice was dangerous now. You're my daughter, my property, and you will come home. Alexander lunged forward, but 2 guards slammed him against the wall. Pain exploded through his shoulder. Don't hurt her, he choked out. Whatever you do to me, don't hurt her. The king looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. You're the guard, the one who was supposed to protect her. I did protect her, Alexander said. From a life she didn't want? Something flickered in the king's eyes, but it was gone in an instant. He turned back to Catherine. You will return to the palace. You will marry Lord Edmund, and you will forget this foolishness. I won't. Tears streamed down Catherine's face, but her voice was steady. I love him, and you can't change that. Love. The king said the word like a curse. Love is for peasants who have nothing else. You are royal. You have responsibilities? I'm a person, Catherine said, and I'm choosing my life. The king stared at her. The room was silent, except for the sound of waves outside. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter now. If you leave with him, you are no longer my daughter. You will have no title, no inheritance, no home to return to, ever. Catherine's breath hitched. This was the final choice, the one that couldn't be undone. She looked at Alexander. He shook his head slightly, trying to tell her it was okay. She could go back, save herself. He would survive somehow. But Catherine turned back to her father. Then I'm not your daughter anymore. The king's face hardened. So be it. He nodded to the guards. Let them go. Everyone froze. The guards looked confused. Your Majesty? I said let them go. The king's voice was weary. She's made her choice. A foolish one, but hers. The guards released Alexander and Catherine. They stumbled toward each other. The king looked at his daughter one last time. You'll regret this. Maybe, Catherine said, but it will be my regret. My life, mine. The king turned and walked out. The guards followed. Leaving Alexander and Catherine alone in the wrecked room, they stood there, shaking, hardly believing what had just happened. Free. Actually free. He let us go, Catherine whispered. He loves you, Alexander realized. He was angry. He'll never forgive us. But he loves you enough to let you choose. Catherine started crying. Relief, grief, joy, all mixed together. Alexander held her as the sun rose outside their window, held her as their ship prepared to leave, held her as they walked onto the deck and watched the kingdom fade into the distance. 3 weeks later, they arrived at the Southern Isles. They found a small cottage near the sea. Alexander found work as a blacksmith. Catherine learned to cook, to clean, to live without servants. It was hard. Some days they barely had enough to eat. Some nights they were too tired to speak. But they were together, and they were free. 6 months after they arrived, they were married. Not in a grand cathedral, just in a small church with a kind priest and 2 witnesses they'd met at the market. Catherine wore a simple dress she'd sewn herself. Alexander wore his cleanest shirt. It was the most beautiful wedding either of them had ever seen. Years passed. They had children. 2 sons and a daughter. They taught them about honor and choice, about love being worth fighting for, about choosing your own path. Catherine never forgot she'd been a princess, but she didn't miss it. The life she'd built with Alexander was richer than any palace. The love they'd fought for was more valuable than any crown. And every year, on the anniversary of the night they ran away, they would walk to the cliff above the sea. They would hold hands and watch the sunset. And Alexander would ask the same question he'd asked that first night. Do you regret it? And Catherine would give the same answer. Not for a second, because some loves are worth losing everything for. Some promises last forever. And some stories, the ones written by the heart, are the truest ones of all. Their love story became legend in the village. People told it to their children. The princess who gave up her crown, the guard who risked everything, the love that couldn't be stopped. The palace tried to hide it. But you can't hide truth. You can't hide love. And you can't hide a promise that lasts forever.